Welcome back to the bunker. Today's episode is brought to you by Zippy's Fizz 12% by volume, the soda pop with a little extra zip after a hot day fishing down the irradiated swamps. Don't delay, buy today.
In addition to his other vocations, he was the singing master of the neighbourhood and picked up many bright shillings by instructing young folks in psalmody. It was a matter of no little vanity to him on Sundays to take his station in front of the church gallery with a band of chosen singers, where in his own mind he completely carried away the palm for the parson. Certain it is, his voice resounded far above all the rest of the congregation, and there are peculiar quavers still to be heard in that church, and which may even be heard half a mile off, quite to the opposite side of the mill pond on a still Sunday morning, which are said to be legitimately descended from the nose of Ichabod Crane. Thus, by divers little makeshifts, in the ingenious way which is commonly denominated by hook and by crook, the worthy pedagogue got on tolerably enough, and was thought by all who understood nothing of the labour of headwork to have a wonderfully easy life of it. The schoolmaster is generally a man of some importance in the female circle of rural neighbourhood, being considered a kind of idle gentlemanlike personage, of vastly superior taste and accomplishments to the rough country swains, and indeed inferior in learning only to the parson. His appearance thereof is apt to occasion some little stir at the tea-table of a farmhouse, and the addition of a supernumerary dish of cakes or sweetmeats, or peradventure the parade of a silver teapot. Our man of letters thereof was peculiarly happy in the smiles of the country damsels. How he would figure among them in the churchyard between services on Sundays, gathering grapes for them from the wild vines that overran the surrounding trees, reciting for their amusement all the epitaphs on the tombstones, or sauntering with a whole bevy of them along the banks of the adjacent mill pond, while the more bashful country bumpkins hung sheepishly back, envying his superior elegance and address. From his half-inerrant life, also, he was a kind of travelling gazette, carrying the whole budget of local gossip from house to house, so that his appearance was always greeted with satisfaction. He was, moreover, esteemed by the women as a man of great erudition, for he had read several books quite through, and was a perfect master of Cotton Mather's History of New England Witchcraft, in which, by the way, he most firmly and potently believed. He was, in fact, an odd mixture of small shrewdness and simple credulity. His appetite for the marvellous and his powers of digesting it were equally extraordinary, and both he, being increased by his residence in this spellbound region, no tale was too gross or monstrous for his capricious swallow. It was often his delight, after his school was dismissed in the afternoon, to stretch himself on the rich bed of clover bordering the little brook that whimpered by his schoolhouse, and there con over Mather's direful tales until the gathering dusk of evening made the printed page a mere mist before his eyes. Then, as he wended his way by swamp and stream and awful woodland to the farmhouse where he happened to be quartered, every sound of nature at the witching hour fluttered his excite imagination. The moan of a whip-poor-will from the hillside, the boding cry of the tree-toad, that harbinger of storm, the dreary hooting of a screech owl, or the sudden rustling in the thicket of birds, frightened from their roost. The fireflies, too, which sparkled most vividly in the darkest places, now and then startled him. As one of uncommon brightness would stream across his path, and if by chance a huge blockhead of a beetle came winging his blundering flight against him, the poor valet was ready to give up the ghost, with the idea that he was struck with a witch's token. His only recourse on such occasions, either to drown thought or drive evil spirits away, was to sing psalm tunes, and the good people of Sleepy Hollow, as they sat by their doors of an evening, were often filled with awe at hearing his nasal melody, in linked sweetness long drawn out, floating from the distant hill or along the dusky road. Another of his sources of fearful pleasure was to pass long winter evenings with the old Dutch wives as they sat spinning by the fire, with a row of apples roasting and spluttering along the hearth, and listen to their marvellous tales of ghosts and goblins, and haunted fields, and haunted brooks, and haunted bridges, and haunted houses, and particularly of the headless horseman, or galloping Hessian of the Hollow, as they sometimes called him. He would delight them equally by his anecdotes of witchcraft, and of the direful omens and pretentious sights and sounds in the air, which prevailed in the earlier times of Connecticut, and would frighten them woefully with speculations upon comets and shooting stars, and with the alarming fact that the world did absolutely turn around, and that they were half the time topsy-turvy. But if there was a pleasure in all of this, while snugly cuddling in the chimney corner of a chamber that was all of a ruddy glow from the crackling wood fire, and where of course no spectre dared to show its face, it was dearly purchased by the terrors of his subsequent walk homewards. What fearful shapes and shadows beset his path, amidst the dim and ghastly glare of a snowy night! With what wistful look did he eye every trembling ray of light streaming across the waste fields from some distant window! How often was he appalled by some shrub covered with snow, which looked like a sheeted spectre, beset his very path! How often did he shriek with curdling awe at the sound of his own steps on the frosty crust beneath his feet, and dread to look over his shoulder, lest he should behold some uncouth being trampling close behind him! And how often was he thrown into complete dismay by some rushing blast howling among the trees, in the idea that the galloping Hessian on one of his nightly scours. All these, however, were mere terrors of the night, phantoms of the mind that walk in darkness, and though he had seen many spectres in his time, and been more than once beset by Satan in divers shapes, in his lonely perambulations, yet daylight put an end to all these evils, and he would passed a pleasant life of it, in despite of the devil and all of his works. If his path had not been crossed by a being that causes more perplexity to mortal man than ghosts, goblins, and the whole race of witches put together, and that was a woman. Among the musical disciples who assembled one evening each week to receive his instructions in psalmody was Katrina Van Tassel, the daughter and only child of a substantial Dutch farmer. She was a blooming lass of fresh 18, plump as a partridge, ripe and melting, and rosy-cheeked as one of her father's peaches, and universally famed not merely for her beauty, but her vast expectations. She was, withal, a little of a coquette, as might be perceived even in her dress, which was a mixture of ancient and modern fashions, and most suited to set off her charms. She wore the ornaments of pure yellow gold, which her great-great-grandmother had brought over from Saardam, the tempting stomacher of the olden time, and withal a provokingly short petticoat, to display the prettiest foot and ankle in the country road. Ichabod Crane had a soft and foolish heart towards the sex, and it is not to be wondered that at so tempting a morsel soon found favour in his eyes, more especially after he had visited her in her paternal mansion. Old Baltus Van Tassel was a perfect picture of a thriving, contented, liberal-hearted farmer. He seldom, it is true, sent either his eyes or his thoughts beyond the boundaries of his own farm, but within those everything was snug, happy, and well conditioned. He was satisfied with his wealth, but not proud of it, and piqued himself upon a hearty abundance rather than the style in which he lived. His stronghold was situated on the banks of the Hudson, in one of those green sheltered fertile nooks in which the Dutch farmers are so fond of nestling. A great elm tree spread its broad branches over it, at the foot of which bubbled up a spring of the softest and sweetest water, in a little well formed of a barrel, and then stole sparkling away through the grass to the neighbouring brook that babbled along among alders and dwarf willows. Hard by the farmhouse was a vast barn that might have served for a church, every window and crevice of which seemed bursting forth with treasures of the farm. The flail was busily resounded within it morning to night. Swallows and martins skimmed twittering about the eaves, and rows of pigeons, some with one eye turned up, and as if watching the weather, some with their heads under their wings or buried in their bosoms, and others swelling and cooing, and bowing at their dames, were enjoying the sunshine on the roof. Sleek, unwieldy porkers were grunting in the repose and abundance of their pens, from whence sailed forth now and then troops of sucking pigs, as if to sniff the air. A stately squadron of snowy geese were riding in the adjoining pond, conveying whole fleets of ducks. Regiments of turkeys were gobbling through the farmyard, and guinea fowls fretting about it, like ill-tempered housewives with their peevish, discontented cry. Before the barn door shuttered the gallant cock, the pattern of a husband, a warrior, and a fine gentleman clapping his burnished wings and crowing in the pride of the gladness of his heart, sometimes tearing up the earth with his feet, and then generously calling his ever-hungry family of wives and children to enjoy the rich morsel which he had discovered. The pedagogue's mouth watered as he looked upon the sumptuous promise of a luxurious winter fare. In his devouring mind's eye he pictured to himself every roasting pig running about with a pudding in his belly, with an apple in his mouth. The pigeons were snugly put to bed in a comfortable pie, and tucked in with a culvert of crust. The geese were swimming in their own gravy, and the ducks pairing cosily in dishes. The snug married couples with a decent competency of onion sauce. In the porkers he saw carved out the future sleek side of bacon and juicy relishing ham, not a turkey, but he beheld daintily trussed up with its gizzards under its wing, and peradventure a necklace of savoury sausages, and even bright Chanticleer himself lay sprawling on his back as a side dish, with uplifted claws, as if carving that quarter which his chivalrous spirit disdained to ask while living.